Hey everyone, I'm Mariana and wrap-ups are back. If you're new here and you haven't seen one of these before, these are the videos where I talk about everything I watched in the previous month, and I have been doing these on and off for years since the very beginning of my channel, but I haven't done a wrap-up in a while. I think the last one I did was last summer, actually probably around June, so if you've subscribed since then, you probably have no idea that I do these, but yes, I've been getting so many requests to bring these back and I have missed making these videos. So wrap-ups are making a comeback, and let's get into everything I watched in June. By the way, if you're wondering what is this I'm scrolling through, this is my Letterboxd where I log everything I watch and I try to review at least briefly everything I watch. So if you want to follow me on there and see what I'm watching as I'm watching it, you can find me there at Impression Blend. I will leave a link to my Letterboxd as well as the rest of my social media in the info box below. But let's start with As Above, So Below. I watched this on June 1st. This was a rewatch, and a pretty random rewatch at that, because I have seen this probably 2 or 3 years ago when I was going through a bunch of found footage horror movies. Yes, this is a found footage horror film, and I just did not like it at all. My first rating for this movie was 2 out of 5, which is a 4 out of 10. And I don't know. I didn't get it. It went over my head. I was not a big fan of it. For some reason, I decided to give it another try. And let me tell you, this was a completely different experience the second time around. As you can tell, I gave it an 8 out of 10. This is quite an increase of a rating. I normally don't do this. I normally don't change my ratings that extremely, but I really liked this on my second viewing, and it really clicked for me what they were trying to do. And I think this movie is actually a lot smarter than what people are giving it credit for. So this is a found footage horror film, as I mentioned, set in the Paris catacombs, and it is loosely based on Dante's 9 Circles of Hell, on Dante's Inferno. And that is all you need to know going into this. I think if you really go into it with that mindset, you will appreciate it a lot more than I did on my first viewing. And clearly I'm not the only one who didn't appreciate it, because this movie has very questionable ratings. So if you watched it, if it didn't work for you, I do recommend giving it another chance. And if you haven't watched it and you do enjoy good found footage horror, check it out. This is definitely worth your attention. Then I watched Tremors. This is an iconic 90s horror comedy. And yes, this was my first viewing. It is something that a lot of people have a lot of nostalgia for. I do not have that because I didn't watch it back in the day, and as I said, this is my first viewing. So this was fine. I might get murdered in the comments for this because some people have been raising their eyebrows at me for saying this movie is fine, but it's fine. It was entertaining. I'm glad I finally watched it. It had its moments, but overall, I don't think I'm ever going to watch it again, and it just doesn't have the same effect that it did back in the 90s, I think. Let's see what I said about it. Angry sandworms from Dune put in an early 90s goofy horror movie set in a small town in Nevada with guns because America. Pretty fun, though. I feel like this is accurate. Kevin Bacon is a lot of fun in this. 6 out of 10. I stand by this rating. Next up, I watched Crash, David Cronenberg's Crash. I did watch Crimes of the Future at the end of May. Sorry, I skipped that one. I'm still on the fence about that movie, and I really feel like Crimes of the Future, which is not part of this wrap-up, but let's talk about this for a second. My favorite thing about Crimes of the Future was the world building, and I feel like in a Cronenberg film, world building should not be my favorite thing. I want substance, and that movie was definitely light on substance. It touched on a lot of things, but it really didn't dig deep with any of them. So I was pretty middle of the road on that one. After watching it though, I remembered that there are a few Cronenberg films that I still haven't seen yet. Crash is one of them, and so I finally watched it. It is a strange movie based on a J.G. Ballard novel, which I definitely want to read now that I've seen this movie. To read the novel and rewatch the movie, see if I feel differently about it. It's basically about a guy played by James Spader who gets into a serious car accident and discovers that there is this group of people who are aroused by car accidents, and they stage famous car accidents recreatively, and it's very dangerous and very sexual. And that is this movie. That is Crash. So it is as weird as it sounds. And like I said, I'm still not completely sure how I feel about this movie. I gave it a 7 out of 10 because it's definitely something that makes strong choices, and it's unique and one of a kind, and the acting is very good in it. It explores sexuality and desire as a modern concept and implies that things are different from what they used to be and how sexuality plays into our society now. It's a very interesting movie to watch if you can handle it. However, something about it just didn't completely click with me this time around. Might be better on a rewatch. Like I said, I do want to read the novel and see how I feel about it afterwards. But a 7 out of 10, pretty solid on my first viewing, and it is certainly memorable. You're not going to forget that you watched this movie. So definitely a Cronenberg film. After that, I watched the most random thing on Netflix, and that is Tao. I don't think people even know this movie exists because, you know, for good reason. It's not very good. The concept sounds pretty cool because it's about this girl played by Micah Monroe, and she is held captive in this futuristic smart house, and the AI is voiced by Gary Oldman, and she's trying to make friends with the AI and trying to get out of the house. There's some kind of experimenting going on. It's not going well for her. And that, I think, is a pretty fun idea. The cast seems promising, though they do absolutely nothing. I mean, I don't think they cared about this movie very much either. There are some cool visuals as far as futuristic technology goes, but you're not gonna watch a movie just for that. For me, it was very, very middle of the road. I gave it a 5 out of 10, and I definitely don't think you need to watch this movie unless you are absurdly curious and you're like a huge fan of this type of movie, but I still don't think this is going to be your new favorite. There just isn't that much to it. And there are definitely some serious plot holes and some very questionable writing. After that, I rewatched The Final Girls. Now, The Final Girls is a movie I feel like is very underrated, even though it is not a masterpiece. As you can tell, I gave it a 7 out of 10. Yet again, that is the initial rating that I gave it. And this is essentially a movie that makes fun of cabin horror movies. It's kind of a time loop cabin horror movie. So if you're into that type of thing, I think you're going to enjoy it. It's partly a love letter to those cabin and camp slashers, and partly a just lighthearted comedy with a nice cast. I think if you are a horror fan and you're looking for something light to watch this summer that will kind of go along with the season, but still keep it on the horror side of things, you should definitely check this one out if you haven't yet. Then I watched the US remake of Funny Games. I have seen the original a while ago, and I finally gathered enough strength to watch the remake. The fun thing about Funny Games is that the US remake is made by the same director who made the original, Michael Haneke, and it is a shot-for-shot, word-for-word remake, just with a different cast and slight adjustments, nothing you would notice unless you were really paying attention. It's essentially a home invasion movie. It's a story about a family who arrive at their holiday home, and they are visited by 2 young men who seem very nice, but eventually just end up torturing them. And I have to be honest, I do not know how to rate Funny Games. It is a film that I admire for what it's trying to do. I think it is very effective in what it's trying to do, and I understand what is happening and what it's commenting on, but I just really don't like the experience of Funny Games, the original or the US remake. It just does not bring me any kind of enjoyment to watch this movie, and not in a way where it's effective as a horror film and I'm scared of it. It's just, it annoys me. I don't like watching it. It is a very unique film for me in that sense, because I normally don't react to movies this way, and some people would say that that means it is effective and I should give it a high rating because it worked, but I I don't know how I could possibly give it a high rating if I don't like it. I admire it, I just don't like it. If I were to choose one of the two, I would choose the US version over the original version. I think it just makes those small improvements that make it a little bit better, and the cast in particular works a lot better for me in the remake. I would definitely recommend watching Funny Games and forming your own opinion on it, because it is kind of a must-watch, especially if you are interested in horror and commentary on horror. It's a very meta film, even though it's not meta in your face. You have to see it to understand. But I cannot promise you that you're not just going to hate yourself the entire time you're watching it. You're not going to sit there and question why you're doing this to yourself, because that is what I did watching Funny Games. So I'm just continuing to not rate it because I don't know what I could possibly give this film. Yeah. I don't know. It's not a 0 out of 10. It's just an I don't know out of 10. Then I watched Spiderhead, which is the other Joseph Kosinski film this year. The first one being Top Gun Maverick, and that one was amazing. If you haven't seen my review of it, I have it on my channel. But Spiderhead was not amazing, even though it also has Miles Teller in it. It just didn't do anything for me at all. It's not offensively bad, but it's not good either. It's just kind of a passable film that you're gonna watch and forget. Once again, this is one of those films where the premise sounds interesting because it's about prisoners in a state-of-the-art penitentiary where they are testing emotion and mind controlling drugs, and prisoners consent to this, but it seems like they're not really understanding what they're consenting to. And Miles Teller is of course trying to discover if there's potentially something very shady going on. I mean, it's a thriller, so there probably is something shady going on. This is also starring Chris Hemsworth, so it's a fun cast and it's a fun premise, but it is just a very meh movie. It is your typical watch it and forget it, direct to streaming kind of thriller. The cast pretty much carries the entire thing. I give it a 5 out of 10, and I will not be thinking about it ever again after I finish filming this video. After that, I decided to venture back into the classics territory with horror once again, and this is the iconic John Carpenter's They Live. I do not know why it took me so long to watch this movie. I have been so interested in it. The concept of it is so cool, with the glasses that reveal the world as it is, with the aliens and everything. I'm sure you have seen stills from this movie. If you haven't seen the actual film, I'm pretty sure most people have seen the actual film, and it is great. I don't think I need to justify it or describe it because it is so famous and so iconic. I just loved it. It's definitely something that's going to be added to my collection that I'm going to be watching again because it was fun and it was unique and it is famous for a reason. I will say I have a lot of questions for these aliens. Why are they trying to control humans? What do they need from us? And yeah, why are we being taken over? I get this is all an allegory and I understand that part, but in the world of a movie, I have so many questions. I would love to meet one of them and have a chat. But yes, skull-faced aliens who are determined to achieve world domination are getting an 8 out of 10 from me. So much fun. Check this movie out if you haven't. Don't be me. Don't put this off for way too long. After that, I watched Elvis for the first time. Yes, I watched Elvis again, and I'll probably be seeing it for the third time. I gave it an 8 out of 10 on my first viewing. I apologize to Elvis and to Baz Luhrmann and to Austin Butler for giving this movie an 8 because it's definitely a 9 out of 10. I don't know why I was second guessing myself. I have a full review. You should check it out. I stand by everything I said in that review except for the rating, and when you see this come up the second time on this wrap up, you will see that I changed the rating. So Elvis sent me on this whole journey. I first of all wanted to watch some documentaries about Elvis. The one I chose was Elvis Presley, The Searcher. This is an HBO documentary. It's a 2-parter. They are, I believe, an hour and a half each, so it's a pretty long documentary, but very fascinating. Highly recommend. Gave that one an 8 out of 10. And then I just decided to rewatch Baz Luhrmann movies for a while, starting with The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is a movie a lot of people dislike because of Baz Luhrmann's style, because of his use of modern music. It's an ongoing debate with his movies, always. Does this music make sense or is it annoying? I am on the side that it makes sense, and I think it works, and I think it achieves the goal that it's trying to achieve. And I understand that Baz Luhrmann isn't for everybody, but he's certainly for me. I do really like The Great Gatsby. I love the style. I love the cast. I think there are some things about it that don't work, and there is some very obvious CGI that is a little bit frustrating, but overall, I think it is a wonderfully done adaptation, and a pretty faithful adaptation at that. So The Great Gatsby was also an 8 out of 10 for me. Then I rewatched Romeo and Juliet, which is the first movie I watched from Baz Luhrmann way back in the day, and my mind was blown back in the day because it's a modern adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. It is essentially set in modern day, but they're still using the Shakespeare, and I was just, this is great. One of the most amazing things I've seen at that point in my life. I loved it. It did not hold up for me as well as I hoped. I'm definitely not as mind blown by it as I was back in the day. I ended up giving it a 7 out of 10, but it is still something that I hold near and dear to my heart. It's just that some of it feels like a 90s music video, and I don't necessarily mean that in a good way. As much as I love the 90s, it eventually gets into a really good tone and a good kind of style, but the beginning is pretty rough, and there are parts of it that are pretty rough. Everything that has to do with Romeo and Juliet specifically is absolutely great, and the visuals are pretty cool, but yeah, not all of it. Not my favorite Baz Luhrmann. Then I took a little break from Baz Luhrmann and watched Cha-Cha Real Smooth. I was really looking forward to this one after people have been buzzing about it. After Sundance, I believe, people loved this movie, and I really enjoyed it. It's definitely a bit of a hangout movie, a bit of a vibe movie, as they say. And if you're not vibing with it, you might not love it. But I think a lot of people can relate to this movie because it has to do with figuring yourself out, figuring life out, searching for yourself, even when others might view you as an adult, even when you're at an age where you should have your life together and you should know what you're doing. Not everybody does, and it is just so warm and kind and cute, and it's a nice positive watch is the best way I can describe it. And it's not cheesy either. It is a very sweet indie film, and Dakota Johnson, she's always wonderful, but she is so lovely here. I love her. Ended up giving this movie an 8 out of 10. Just remember that getting your life together is a journey, not a destination. That was my takeaway from this. But if you want a movie that's going to make you smile, check out Cha-Cha Real Smooth. It is streaming on Apple TV+. Then I went back to Baz Luhrmann and I watched Strictly Ballroom, which is his first movie, the very first film he made, and I was so pleasantly surprised, you guys. I thought this was going to be rough because it is from back in 1992, and it is not something that I normally watch. Like, I don't watch a lot of dance movies. It's not necessarily my thing. Unless they're ballet movies, that is a different thing. But this is just not something that screams Mariana is going to love this. I enjoyed this movie so much. When it ended, I just thought, I don't feel like criticizing this film. I don't feel like nitpicking what's wrong with it, what it could have done better, what's cheesy, what's over the top. I had a good time, and it put a smile on my face, and it was so joyful and open-hearted. I just can't resist a movie that has a lot of heart and a lot of passion, and the characters in it are passionate about what they're doing, and they have good intentions, and there's a lot of drama, and everything is very important. I like stuff like that, okay? And this movie does it really well. You can actually tell that this is the type of movie that Baz Luhrmann would start with, because it has a little bit of chaos. It has a vibrancy and a theatricality to it. It's not as extreme as it has gotten in his later films. It's definitely not a maximalist film like his other movies, but is still very much Baz Luhrmann. And if you're a fan of the director like I am, absolutely check this out. You will just relax and have fun, and you will see where he started. So I ended up giving that an 8 out of 10. I did not expect that I would be giving this movie an 8 out of 10, but here we are. Then I rewatched Top Gun Maverick. I wanted to see it one more time in theaters. I loved it on my second viewing. Once again, check out my review if you haven't seen it. But yes, I gave it a 9 out of 10 yet again. Then I saw The Black Phone. Now listen, I know a lot of people are really enjoying The Black Phone, and if you had fun with this movie, I'm glad. I'm happy you had a great time. This is exactly the type of horror film where I don't understand mainstream horror, because I can't watch this movie and accept it for what it is. I need villain motivations. I need there to not be conveniences. I need the script to not be something where it relies on certain characters making certain mistakes for things to progress. I can't deal with stuff like that in horror movies and in movies in general. And if a movie has that, it needs to give me something else to distract me from those things. And that is not something Black Phone was able to do. I thought it was okay. The Black Phone was fine. That is my review. It was fine. I also have to say I was very frustrated that Ethan Hawke was mostly in a mask this movie. Now, it doesn't mean that he is performing poorly or something. I think he is still menacing, and it is very impressive what he's able to do with his eyes and with his voice and with his physicality. He is able to make this character menacing, and the mask that is constantly changing is very cool, but why do you put Ethan Hawke under a mask for the majority of the movie? You barely see him without a mask, and it made me sad because he is such a great actor. I just felt like I was robbed of a really fun Ethan Hawke performance. But yeah, another one of those movies where I thought the premise was really interesting. I really liked the setting. The 70s setting really worked for me, and the way they capture that as far as the cinematography goes. I love the supernatural aspect of it. I thought that was a fun idea. But overall, I wanted a lot more from this movie, and I just do not understand why people are loving it as much as they are. I don't get it. I wish I saw the same movie they did, but yes, a 6 out of 10 for The Black Phone. Then I saw Elvis once again, and yes, that is when I gave it a 9 out of 10. I cried for the last 20 minutes of that film. On and off, but more on than off. I got so emotional the second time around. I got emotional the first time around too, but the second time around, somehow knowing what I'm about to see and knowing how it's about to unfold just made it so much worse for me emotionally. And yeah, it really hit me hard. I still am not 100% sold on the Tom Hanks performance, but yeah, as I said, watch my review. I talk a lot about what I liked about this movie. 9 out of 10, one of my favorite films of the year at the moment, and I think it's going to stay in my top 10. We'll see, but I don't think it's going to leave my top 10. After that, I finished my Baz Luhrmann rewatch with Moulin Rouge, and I gave that one a 9 out of 10 as well. The interesting thing about Moulin Rouge is that I was never a big fan of Moulin Rouge. I know that sounds crazy, but it just never really clicked for me as much as it did for other people. I liked it, I just never loved it. And this was my third viewing. And for some reason, this was the viewing that did it for me. Like, this was a whole different movie for me the third time around. Some people take 3 viewings to appreciate Blade Runner. I took 3 viewings to appreciate Moulin Rouge. What are you gonna do? Do I even need to tell you anything about Moulin Rouge? I mean, this is one of the most famous movies on this list today. It is very Baz Luhrmann. It is a musical. It is very romantic. It is very dramatic. There's a lot of vibrancy and color and glamour and tragedy. It's visually striking. The cast is great. The emotion is there. If you somehow have not seen Moulin Rouge, I don't know how that happened, but please watch it because you're definitely missing out. 9 out of 10. And then I decided to move on to Sinister. Now, I have seen Sinister before. I've done a lot of rewatching this month. I wanted to rewatch Sinister because Sinister is another one of those movies that everybody loves, and I'm just sitting here scratching my head why. Just like The Black Phone, Sinister is directed by Scott Derrickson and written by C. Robert Cargill and is starring Ethan Hawke. Thankfully, without a mask this time. Honestly, it might just be that Scott Derrickson is not the director for me because I have very similar criticisms between The Black Phone and Sinister, and both of them just don't do all that much for me. If I were to choose between the two, I would go with The Black Phone, but barely. But as you can tell, I gave Sinister a 5 out of 10. And I just feel like in both of these cases, the cast carries these movies. In the case of Sinister, it is definitely on the shoulders of Ethan Hawke. In the case of The Black Phone, it is the kids as well, especially the girl. I forget what her name is. But for Sinister, yes, I guess the tapes are a little bit spooky, but we have seen creepy tapes and creepy children before. This isn't new. I just don't think Sinister is doing anything we haven't seen before or doing it all that well. And the jump scares are annoying and ridiculous, which is also an issue I had with Black Phone. Forgot to say that. The jump scares in The Black Phone. Why? Stop it. I do not like jump scares. Anyways, I'm going to stop rambling. I don't like it. Actually, actively do not like this movie. Gave it a 5 out of 10. Definitely not the satisfying rewatch that As Above, So Below was, because that one I appreciated so much more on the rewatch, and this one I'm still very middle of the road about, except for I actually don't really like it, and I definitely am not going to be watching it for the third time. So yeah, that's where I am with Sinister. I apologize if you're a fan. And finally, the last thing I watched was Fresh, which was also a rewatch. I find this movie very underrated. I don't see a lot of people talk about it at all. It is streaming on Hulu and you need to check it out. I understand that this movie is going to gross some people out because of its concept, and it's kind of tough because I don't want to spoil it by revealing what's actually going on, but it is kind of gross. But overall, I think it does work really well, and it is a very clever horror film that works as a straightforward horror drama and also works as an allegory for modern dating. You can take it either way. And you have Sebastian Stan doing his best impression of Patrick Bateman, which is lovely and absolutely works in this role as well. I really enjoyed his joyful weirdness and creepiness and awkwardness, and I am a big fan of Fresh. I think this movie is not getting the attention it deserves. I gave it a very solid 8 out of 10, and it is also one of my current favorites of the year. Though I will say it's starting to fade out of my top 10 a little bit because I've seen some really, really good movies that have bumped it down. But so far, it's still in my top 10, which, by the way, let me know if you want to see one of those best of 2022 so far video. I would love to do either a top 5 or a top 10 for you if that is something you're interested in. So let me know in the comments, and let me know, of course, if you've seen any of these films and what did you think of them. I would love to get your opinions, and I hope you are having a wonderful day. I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.